Now we have a set of four use cases corresponding to research ecosystem. They're rather diverse because this is sort of a grab all for cross-cutting use cases which didn't naturally fit into any one particular discipline. It's not meant to say they aren't important, they're just cross-cutting. In fact, cross-cutting is often the most important case. Uh, while the DataNet Federation Consortium, DFC, is an important project which has actually 25 separate science and engineering projects involved with it, and is basically allowing the federation is tackling data management. It has a very important piece of software called IRODS, Integrated Rule Oriented Data System, developed originally at SDSC, but now headed at University of North Carolina by Reagan Moore, and this is sort of the standard now used for metadata management across many fields. And as you look at this big data, many of these big data projects, we'll come across one that explicitly says this in the um, uh, for a NASA project later on in the Earth science area. That managing this data is critical, and being able to take the metadata, um, properly process it, and so on is critical. Um, So this notes that IRODS manages petabytes of data, hundreds of millions of files, hundreds of millions of metadata attributes, tens of thousands of users, and 1,000 storage resources. It works with other types of cyber infrastructure, particular workflow. Workflow is always very sensitive to metadata because it has to link different capabilities together. And it runs on clouds and other types of Lustre type storage models and lots of different transport protocols. So this is a very important, it itself is not big data, but it's essential to manage big data. So this is a technology to manage big data. Here is an actual graph which shows how this project is set up. This comes from this DataNet is a big NSF initiative, build data consortiums. And this is in the spirit of that initiative, supplying the technology to manage the data used by multiple consortiums. And you can see here the policies are very important. In this IRODS approach, you specify policies which are automatically applied. Here we have another type of approach to collaboration. This is not so well known, I think, at least in the US. This started off in Europe. DISANET, and it is a way of trying to organize collaborations, the interdisciplinary collaborations that you find in typical science today. So it's implicitly big data because these collaborations are definitely big data. And it provides a methodology and some technologies to support collaboration. And they have around 35 different groups working in this at the moment. And they're trying to get started with up to 100 additional groups. So, and they point out they come from optics, cosmology, materials, algae, health, applied math, computation, rubber, chemistry, and so on. And so it will obviously involve things like analyzing the documents in the field, so that will be big data. The metadata will be like that of the previous use case 32, very critical. So I might even use the same technology. This is not a technology, but more an approach. Here we have an example which focuses on some of the document issues which are necessary about how we set up the social media infrastructure to present technology information and be able to deposit in a social media fashion results of an experiment in a fashion that's reusable. And this, will involve things like analysis of all the documents. So they have ideas based on languages such as Sanskrit and Latin, which I'm not personally familiar with. Well, I'm familiar with Latin. I had to take that to school, but I'm not familiar with the their special features that's used here. And they use these ideas in way of setting up the methodologies in a cross discipline fashion. So this is again like the previous use case, trying to support the global virtual organizations or infrastructures that are needed to support today's big data work. Here's the last of this subset, which is a very different. This is real down to earth. We actually discussed bioimages. So bioimages can come from your friendly MRI machine or your friendly device in the hospital, but they can also come from a big accelerator, which takes electrons, whips them, accelerates them, and then as the electron accelerates and runs in a circle, it will produce light, and that's what synchrotron radiation. And so synchrotron light sources are very important. There's several across the country of various degrees of, they have different types of energy for the photons produced, and they effectively produce images. And those images, which would be in various wavelengths, then need to be analyzed. And so this points out that these large-scale apparatus produced is an example of light sources. Many of them are biological. Often you take these photons and use them to impact biological assays and things like that. So as they point out, the cameras used to record the results are growing in resolution, and this data is taken at the accelerator website, but they need to be transmitted back either to a high-performance computer or a cloud to be analyzed in effective fashion. And there's a lot of potential data here. They have 39 beam lines at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, synchrotron. I think ALS, probably advanced light source. And and this is giving you gigabytes per second of data from these different beam lines. Each of those beam lines is split off at different places, and the photons go off and hit a particular target, and then the results of what happens are recorded by the camera. So this is a typical, we will see other types of accelerators which are used for particle physics, where the results are not images, but rather the events produced recording what happens when high energy particles collide. So accelerators, depending on what they accelerate and the energy in which they have, can have their results recorded in various fashions. But all of them, these are big instruments. Each individual instrument produces large amounts of data. So we now come on to, we have 3 more use case groupings to go: astronomy and physics, Earth, environmental and polar science and energy. The next set are astronomy and the physics use cases, will include the famous Large Hadron Collider, which we'll discuss separately in this section, and also astronomy. So we will now go on to those.